Hello, hello, hello. I've got one person right now having trouble getting logged in that just messaged, so I'm gonna wait for just a few moments, but we've got a couple. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm just cruising through some of my books to see like what style of ballet shirt pops up the most, but we're gonna do a couple variations. And we're gonna do kind of like a Flames of Paris Bournonville something, and then we'll just do like another kind of version of that. And then tonight I'm going to send everybody, I've got a really great set of briefs and trunks just for men that I've used for quite a while for the bottoms of their shirts. There's like a full cut one and a slimmer cut one. So I'm going to send that to everybody tonight. And today we're going to start real quick with a body block and then just work from a body block to start our couple different versions of boy shirts or men's shirts. And then we'll start cutting some fabric out and putting some stuff together tomorrow. But I'm going to really quick flip through another book here. But I want to show everybody what a Bournonville shirt is. Am I in a good spot? Yeah. This book is just ballet and modern dance from who knows when. But here's a photo down here from Flower Festival. I can take pictures of these and send them to. A Bournonville shirt just has like kind of a standing Peter Pan collar, kind of a fluffy sleeve, and kind of a looser armhole. But most people more modern like a tighter armhole. So we'll look at like different things you can do with the armhole. So that's kind of a Bournonville Flames of Paris shirt. Here's another. This is from Flower Festival. I think these both might be Flower Festival. But there's like just another classic men's ballet shirt. Like it's not super full around the waist, but there's a little bit of gather. This one, the armpit's a little bit more fitted, and he's got a little bit of a cuff. Sometimes the wrist is gathered and the cuff is a flounce, and sometimes there's a proper cuff on it. But again, he's got kind of his tall, floppy collar. So that's one of the styles of shirt we'll do. And then anybody who does Nutcracker comes often across the men's like kind of Russian style shirt, which we're not really going to focus on today. Whoops. But if you just like go to Google and look up like men's basic peasant shirt, you will find all sorts of directions for a shirt that's just a rectangle for the sleeves, a rectangle for the body, and then it's got little square gussets in the armpit to give them a little bit more movement. So it's like kind of like a kimono cut shirt. But so that's like a really good shirt for Russian, or if you're doing little Polly Chanel clown boys, this is fun to put like a little belt on around the waist and give them a peplum. But so that's like a really, really basic shirt. So we're going to go a little more elaborate than that. And real quick, I wanted to flip through this American Ballet book to see there's another kind of, it's more Bournonville stuff. But here again, this guy, this is the picture I was thinking of. He's got a really long, deep cuff, and he's got a little more fullness at the back of his sleeve, like we talk about every now and then. So these are just a whole bunch of different versions of shirts on a trunk, but that little collar shows up a lot. So we will do that little collar. And then, yes, this shirt just shows up absolutely everywhere. Like almost every single ballet. I don't even know. This is just some company photo from American Ballet Theater in 1977. Looks like there's some Capelli and Don Quixote stuff in there. In Don Quixote, they wear a lot of just that same old basic shirt. Yeah, the old books are really good references because oftentimes at a ballet company, you're creating something that's been done before. Like here's some pictures from Rodeo. And it's just kind of fun to see what stuff looked like a while back. Oh, here's another shirt. This one, I would say this is more of a poet's shirt. And I'll send people pictures of these in an email. The more poetic one, or the like Romeo romantic shirt. I wonder what this is from. Doesn't say. He eventually directed American Ballet Theater School. Leon Danielin. A more poetic shirt has a much larger sleeve. There's much more gather at the wrist, and there's a great big armhole. So the armhole isn't as tight against his body. There's a lot more room. There's a lot more fullness. And you can see he's got a cuff on here. He's got like a 3-inch cuff, but the sleeve is so long that when his arm is down, it completely covers the cuff. So when you've got a bigger sleeve, a flowier sleeve, a bigger armhole, it's usually a little more romantic. It's got more of like of a pirate vibe, or, you know, Romeo, I guess, you know, he's like a pirate in a way, a Verona pirate. So it's like more romantic. So you can kind of think about like your character versus the silhouette of the shirt too. So like the more fitted shirt is more for like a darty, go get 'em guy. The looser shirt is more for a guy who's like expressing his love with his body. But we're going to start with a body block, which this is new for a few of you and repeat news for some other people. So I will go through it pretty quickly, but we're using the Costume Technician Handbook again, and we are going to make a men's block for the body and a men's block for the sleeve, and then we'll look at collars too. The men's body block starts on page. Do they do it after the women's body block? It's after the women's. A man's is just a woman's, but without a bust start, really. Come on, dude. There it is. So let's collect the measurements we need first. And I have got my size 36 boy over here. So if you want to flip the camera, just so everybody can see what I'm measuring, we need the chest, waist, back, neck to waist. We need the shoulder, and we need the front width and the back width. Now, when you're making your shirt, here, you can flip her around here. You can start with a body block that fits your dude, but right, a shirt usually isn't completely fitted. So even though we're going to put waist darts in our body block, we're not going to calculate them out. We're going to just let them hang to make a little fullness. And our sides of our body block are going to taper in. We might just let them run straight down. So if you do that, you'll have a shirt that fits pretty snug across the chest with just a little bit of ease at the waist. Or you can start with a body block that's already got some ease in it. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with a body block that's already got some ease. So this guy's chest is about 39. I'm going to make it 41. So I'm going to add 2 inches of ease around his chest. So instead of adding the ease later, I'm going to put it in right now. So we're going to start with a body block that's a little bit bigger. So if you have their written measurements, you can just add a little bit of ease. And usually 2 inches is kind of standard for a chest. So his waist is 29, but I'm actually going to say it's 32. I'm going to make his waist a little bit looser so there's something to gather in, and we're also not going to stitch in the darts. His back, neck to waist, you think I'd have this memorized by now, is 18, but we're going to eventually add about 3 inches, 2.5 or 3 inches below the waist, and that's where we're going to put a trunk on tomorrow. We'll deal with the trunk. So we want the shirt to go down to his waist, but then we need something to keep it tucked in. So we're going to start with an 18-inch back, neck to waist. His shoulder. Here's another place where you can cheat a little bit. If you want the shoulder to run, the seam to run right on his shoulder, this guy's is 5.5. If you want the shirt to be a little bit relaxed, you can extend the shoulder. And actually, if you look at like most shirts, sweaters, everything, it's a little sloppy, but usually the shoulder's a little far out. So if you were doing the more romantic one, you could definitely extend the shoulder a little bit. So his is 5.5. We're going to say it's 6.5. We're going to enlarge the shoulder some. While I'm back here, I'll do his back width. And again, I'm going to add a little bit to it because we're kind of widening the whole body block before we start. So his back width is 14. I'm going to say it's 15. I'm going to add an inch to the back width. And his front width is 13. I'm going to say it's 14. So we're gonna open everything up a little tiny bit. Then I'm going to just say that he's got a 25-inch shoulder to wrist is pretty good size. We're going to say his shoulder to wrist. This is for our sleeve block later. And then I'm going to just say that his shoulder to elbow is just a little bit less than half a 25, so 12 and a half. I'm going to say his shoulder to elbow is 12. Shoulder to elbow is 12. And I'm going to say his wrist is 9, because that's about an average guy wrist. Let me see what mine is. Mine's like 8.5, so 8.5, 9, anywhere in there. Okay, so let's start making our block. And we're using the old version of the Costume Technician Handbook. And I'm going to just kind of zoom through this because pretty much everybody has done this with me. If you haven't, we do have a set of patterning, older patterning recordings available. Okay. So the first thing that it has us figure out for the body block is the waist dart, which we're not going to put in, but we're going to draft it just for like, you know, practice. So we find the difference between the chest and the waist, and it's 9 inches. So his waist dart is going to be a 1 inch. So I just write that on my paper. And then we need half of the chest. So that's 20 and a half. Half of 41 is 20 and a half. We need a quarter of the back neck to waist. A quarter of 18, I think, is 4 and a half. Right? Yeah, 4 and a half. We need half of the front width is 7. Half of our back width is 7 and a half. And a quarter of the waist, a quarter of 32 is 8 inches. So I just write my little adjustments in there. And let's start with making the body block. So we are going to do the back neck to waist is the height of our block, and then half of our chest is the width of our block. And you'll read in here later on, there's a spot where it's like, if you want a little bit of ease, you can now add some ease, but we already kind of calculated our ease, so we're not going to worry about that. So I'm going to make a rectangle that's 18 inches tall, and I'm leaving room at the bottom because we are going to make this go past, his waist. So really, eventually, we're going to want to measure his high hip and make sure that we've got enough fabric to get around the high hip. So I've got, my front will be on the right, my back will be on the left. Now we're finding the side seam. And we're going to get our armhole from this. Okay, so that's step 1. It has us draw that rectangle. And then the next thing it does is we're coming down a quarter of the back neck to waist to find the armhole and the front and back width placement. So I'm coming down 4 and a half 2 times. So that's where his armhole, like the cut in for the armhole, will be, and that's essentially his armpit right there. Now we're going to put in the neck. We go 3 inches over from the top right and up a half an inch, and then we make a 3-inch box there. We're eventually going to measure this neck, measure the neck on the dress form to make sure that we've got a good size. Then on the back, we go over 2.5 inches and up a half an inch. So right now, this makes about like a 14.5 or a 15-inch neck. So later, we're going to have to tweak this to get our neck the right size. Then to put in the front shoulder, from this topmost line, we're going to come down 1 3/8 inches. And then we're going to put the ruler on 0 at the top of his neck, close to his neck. And then we're going to come down whatever we decided our shoulder was. And remember, we enlarged the shoulder already, so this is a little bit past 6.5 is a little bit to the outside of his natural shoulder, which just looks kind of doodly, you know, like a proper lady or a men's tailcoat or something. The shoulder's just right, but if you've got a shirt, it's all right for it to be a little bit out or exactly on the shoulder. It's totally up to you. Now we're going to do the front. We're going to do the front armhole, and while I'm there, I'm going to do the back armhole. So this first line that's 4.5 inches down, and that number will be different based on your back, neck to waist. We're going to go in the across front. We figured out our front width was 14, but we only need to come in 7 because we're dealing only with half of the body. And on the back, we're going to come over 7.5. And then because the directions tell us to, we're going to go up 3 inches. Then this back shoulder is a 1/2 inch bigger than the front shoulder. So where our front shoulder was 6.5, the back is actually going to be 7. So there's a little bit of ease in the back shoulder. Okay. So now we've almost got the top part of our body block done, but we've got to put the armhole in. And you can get, there's all kinds of different curves that work to make an armhole. And I always say it's good to have like a collection of different curves so that you can kind of like swap and figure out which one's better. But actually, this neon one is an armhole ruler that I traced from my dad's mother a long time ago that fell apart. It's really close to the armhole and neck ruler that you get from Joann's. So a lot of these rulers have a very similar curve. But so I'm going to lay in my front armhole. And what I like to do is like, right, we measured his across chest front, the distance over from his sternum to where his armhole cuts in. But I like to split the difference. So first I kind of put the ruler where it says the armhole is. But then I also kind of look at it and put the ruler where I think a better armhole looks, right? So I kind of like plot in what I think looks right and what the book says, but then I go back and split the difference. So, and usually when you split the difference, pattern-wise, you know, trust your gut, trust the math, and then kind of use a little bit of both of them. So I've got my front armhole in. Now, my back armhole, because we've extended this shoulder, I'm going to split the difference too. Like my ruler says that's where it is, but over here is where my measurements say it is. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to pick the spot right between the two. Because it's better to have it like a little bit off one way or the other than to wind up with it having it be a lot off one way or the other. So now we're going to put the side seams in. And to do the side seam, we need to know what the waist dart we came up with is. So in the steps, we came up with a 1-inch waist dart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1/4 of the waist, which is 8 inches. So from my center front, I'm going over 8 inches. Then I'm going to go over another inch for the dart, because that dart, if we were making like a tunic or a vest, that dart would get closed. So I'm 8 inches, then I'm 9 inches. And just because it looks nice, the book has us go 1/4 inch more towards the back, because that's just a little bit more fashionable. Then we're going to do the same thing in the back. So I'm going to come over 8 inches plus 1 inch for my waist dart. But where in the front we went to the left 1/4, we're going to also go 1/4 to the left in the back. And that's explained really well in the book. We're just reviewing and getting a body block. So now in the center of our front, so if I were making this into a vest or a tunic, I put the dart in the middle. I find the middle. So this is like about 9 inches. So I go 4.5. But then I think it looks better to put the dart just a little bit closer to the side seam rather than being right in the center of the front. We're going to scoot the dart just a little bit closer to the armpit. So I'm going to scoot the dart 1/2 inch to the left of center. And that dart, some methods have that dart go all the way up to the armpit. This one has it go a little bit below, which is good. I don't know if it says exactly how much below. But if you think about it, the lower the dart is, the more room you've got across the full part of their chest. So if you put the dart higher, you take away a little room. If you put the dart lower, you add a little bit of room. But we're gonna actually not be putting in the darts. But they're a nice reference to have. And then let's say that the shirt is going to tuck, that's going to go 3 inches below his natural waist. So if you know that your pants or your tights or whatever are going even lower than that, you want more shirt to tuck in. So actually, let's do 3.5. Let's go 3.5 inches below the whole waist. And we're going to say this is going to be our block. So we've added ease to the block. You could start with a block that's fitted. Actually, why don't I draw that in miniature? Grab me a piece of typing paper. I just want to make sure that I show you what I'm talking about. So if we started with a block, I'm going to just do a front real quick. If we started with a block, horrid drawings with Travis. So let's say we started with a block that fits him exactly, that has no ease. What you can do is you can take that block, figure out how much larger you want the shirt. So if we wanted to do our like 2 inches of extra at the chest like we've done, you could come in and you could just take the armhole, and if you add a 1/2 inch down there, add a 1/2 inch to the armhole, that gains us another inch. Then the other thing you could do is you could just extend the front a 1/2 inch, or probably what I would also think about is I would maybe extend the front 1/4 inch, extend the front 1/4. Then I would slice this from the shoulder all the way down and open it another 1/4 inch. So instead of putting like a whole 1/2 at the front, we put a little at the front, we put a little down the whole body of the shirt and opened it up, and then we put a little bit down the side. So same thing. So right now, our shoulder would only be a 1/4 inch past the shoulder, which I think is elegant and nice. But if you were going for piratey look, you could extend the shoulder over to the armhole also. So you can start with a fitted block and add the ease, or what we did here is we added the ease at the beginning. So we don't have to move the camera, but I'm gonna measure this guy's hips. He has a really flat butt. I'm gonna go 3 inches down, and his hips measure 33 inches. So we're going to say they measure 34. That's 15, 16, 17. Is 17 half of 34? Yeah. So we're going to say that we want to make sure that he's larger than 17 inches at the high hip, because we also don't want this to get stuck on his hip. So 1/2 of 17, that one, well, 1/2 of 16 is 8, right? So I'm going to go over 8.5 plus 1/4 inch, just like we did in the front. That just puts our side seam straight down and doesn't really put a lot of ease in the hip. So I'm going to say that instead of 34, we're going to put 2 inches of ease around his hips too, just like we did around the chest. So I'm going to say 36 is what I want his high hip to be, so that there's some ease, and actually that'll get gathered onto our trunk. So 36 divided by 2 is 18. 18 divided by 2 is 9. So I'm going to go over 9.25 there. And then I'm going to go over 9.25 minus 1/4 here. So we've got the hip in here now. So we're just going to connect our side seams down to our hip. And then our darts, if we were making a tunic, the front dart goes the same distance below the waist as it is above the waist. So even though our dart could go down to there, we're really only concerned with the part of it that would be in our vest or our tunic. And this is real similar to adding a hip to the girls block. Then in the back, usually the dart is shorter to make more room for the butt. If there were a dart in the back, it would just go down to the high hip line. So we've got our basic block. So we have a front and a back that's got some ease. I'm going to trace this off once, and then we are going to turn it into the bodies of our shirt before we deal with our sleeve. So let me grab another piece of paper here. So whenever, like, right, when I worked at Houston in the Joffrey, the first thing we would do at the beginning of every season is put everybody's measurements, men and women, into a spreadsheet, and we would do them ascending by height, and then we would do them ascending by chest, and then we would do them ascending by waist. We'd kind of make like 3 different spreadsheets. Then we would start to circle or highlight or put groups for who is a easy share, like who can share without any problems. Then we would make blocks in those sizes so that, like, when a great big show came along and you're like, oh gosh, we have to make, 100 shirts for guys that stand in the back and push the goat wagon or who knows what, you could just grab a body block, trace it off, and then you're already on the way to having your pattern done, rather than starting fresh absolutely every time. That's also something we would do in summer theater, is like the first day of summer theater. We'd make a body, sleeve, and pant or skirt block, depending, for every performer, and then fit them the following next couple days, so that as, musical after musical showed up, if you knew their body block fit and that they hadn't really changed size much, you could just bang out costumes. And mostly in the fittings, you'd like talk about what their hair or shoes are going to be, because stuff would fit. Okay, so now I've got one traced off for later. But before we start making the body of our shirt, we'll kind of like draw our shirt out, and we want to check the neck on this. So I'm going to measure. I'm actually going to measure my neck, because the neck on the dress form is like a wrist. It's so tiny. My neck, well, my neck's tiny too, I guess. My neck's 15.5. So what I'm going to do first is follow my tape measure across the back neck is 2.5. And then the front neck is 5. So that makes 5, 6, 7.5. That makes the neck just 15, and I need 15.5. And nobody wants the neck to like fit exactly. So we probably want to put about 3/4 to an inch of ease in there. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. Well, usually what I do is I just say, okay, I'm going to take 1/4 inch into the shoulder. I'm going to take away a little bit of my shoulder and give it to the neck. And then I'm going to do the same in the front. And usually the front neck can be a little bit lower. So I just kind of pencil a new line, remeasure it, and see if I'm getting closer. So now I've got 2 3/4. And then in my front, I now have, right, it's so technical, I now have 5 1/4. So that's 5, 6, 7, 3/4 and 1/4 is 8. I've now got a 16-inch neck, which gives me a 1/2 inch ease. So I'm actually going to come one more time and make it even just a smidge, like 1/8 of an inch bigger, just so we know that we've got some ease. So if I can, whatever you can measure ahead of time is a good thing. Okay, so let's see. Let me draw another one of my famous, beautiful pictures. So what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of this Bournonville style shirt. I'll draw this and then I'll hold it up. So the back of the shirt, we're actually going to make a yoke. So we're going to have a piece kind of like a modern men's shirt. So we're going to have a yoke like that. And even though we've added some fullness into here, we want it to be just a little bit bigger in the back. So we can either have the back gather into the yoke a little bit, or we can have it have a single pleat, or we can have it have a couple pleats, or from the same thing, you can have it have gathers or pleats. So our back is going to be very basic like that. We're going to do a yoke with a couple pleats. Then our front, we're going to have the neck. But so here's our original neck. We're going to make this snap or button the whole way down the front. So we're going to add a button lap, right? And then the rest of our front is just going to come straight down from our armhole, and we're going to get rid of the dart. So our front is going to be shaped like that. Then we're going to pattern a very simple collar that has just a little bit of stand in the back. So it's kind of a Peter Pan collar, but with a point. So in the back of our neck, the collar is going to stand up just a little bit at the back of the neck. So that's the shirt we're going to work on first. Then we'll give it a sleeve with some gathers at the shoulder, and then a cuff, and then a little bit of fullness at the bottom. So this is going to be like our ultra basic boy shirt. So before I start cutting out my body block, there's some stuff I can do already. We can mark where this yoke is going to go, and we can also add our lap on for the buttons and buttonholes. And then when you're messing with your collar, remember that the collar should stop at the center front. It shouldn't go into the lap, okay? So on my body block, the first thing I'm going to do is add my button lap to the front before I cut anything out. So from my center front, most button laps are like 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to just say 5/8. So I'm going to make a line from my center front over 5/8 of an inch. And right where that joins the neck, our new neck, remember we enlarged the neck, I'm going to put just the tiniest little bit of a curve right there for my button lap. Okay, we've added the button lap. Now we're going to come over here in the back and decide where do we want the back yoke to be. And actually this line that's going across the front and back with is a pretty good spot. But just to switch it up, let's go down 1 inch from there just to make it a little more fun. So I am going to, before I even cut anything apart, so that line means nothing to us now. Whether this is gathered or pleated or anything, usually you don't want gathers or fullness going all the way to the armhole. So I'm going to give myself a notch about 3/4 of an inch over from the armhole, and we're going to say that there's no gathers or pleats beyond this little section here, okay? So let's cut these out. And then the next thing we're going to deal with is the fact that this shoulder is 1/2 inch bigger in the back. And the reason the back shoulder is usually bigger, probably even if like we cut my sweater apart, I'm betting that the back shoulder is eased. Actually, it actually looks like it is. I'm betting that the back of this is eased onto the front because that gives you just a little bit of room across your back, which is totally good for dancers. I don't want to jinx it, but the dog is behaving. The poor spoiled dog. So I've got my button lamp, and I'll show you how to make a really easy facing too for this kind of stuff. We call it a lasso facing. I've heard people call it a lariat facing too, but that just means lasso. Is it a brand of lasso, or does it just mean rope? Who knows? So I'm going to cut out my shoulders. My new back neck, remember we enlarged it and made it a little bit bigger than my neck. Now we're going to forget the darts because this is, why would we put gathers across the back but then put a dart in it? So our front and back dart, we're just going to forget because they become that fullness. They become the blousiness of the shirt. Now, the side seams, if you want his shirt to come in a little bit, go with the side seam that you've already got. Or if you want it to come in a little bit but have a little bit to poof out, make your side seam a little bit larger. So actually it is waist. I'm going to just say I'm going to come in and add about 1/4 inch or 3/8 to each side of that and continue it down. So even though we added some fullness to this already, I'm choosing to make it a little bit fuller, but it's still going to go right up to the armpit. We don't want a great big sloppy armpit. So that's the line that I'm going to cut out now. So now we've got our side seam. And remember, none of this has seam allowance. Like on a bodice, we're always drawing the lines and stitching on the lines. But something like this that's a boxier shape or a simpler shape, make your pattern. You can add the seam allowance and then just sew it up. So our front, we're going to need in a little bit to figure out our collar and our facing. And our back, we're going to just chop off our yoke. So we've got our back yoke, which we're going to put on the fold. And you don't need a yoke in a shirt either. A yoke in a shirt lets you put more room across the back while keeping it fitted at the neck. So this is just like a design choice that we're choosing to do. So right now our yoke just fits our back, and we don't have a pleat or we don't have any ease. So or gathers. So if we wanted some gathers up here, what you could do now is just split this down the middle, or trace one side, slide it over, and trace the other side. But I'm going to just split it down the middle, and I'm going to enlarge it going across the back. So I'm going to open this up just a little bit so that we've got a soft amount of gathers. So when the yoke goes onto the body of the back of the shirt, we're going to gather a little bit on. So we've made the shirt larger, or we can put a pleat or 2 pleats. Whatever you decide is totally fine. But check this out. You can enlarge the shirt the same amount the whole way across, or if you want that look but don't want to make it fuller tucked down in his tights, often what I'll do is I'll enlarge the top more because I already know this fits his hip, and I'll enlarge the hem a little bit less. So we get that illusion that it's gathered onto the yoke and that there's room across his chest to make some blousiness and stuff, but we don't need to add as much fabric down in the hip. So the top of this I'm opening about 2 inches, and the bottom I'm opening just like a smidge more than 1. And then you can retrace this to your pattern paper. But I'm going to make a tape bridge. Whoops, except I lost what I was doing. So you can make it, you can add volume the whole way down, or you can add a little more volume or fullness at the top and less at the hip, because if he's wearing just a shirt and tights, the less stuff that he's got gathered in around his butt, the happier he will be. So we're going to say that our yoke is on the fold. So now we've got a yoke and a back, and we're going to say that our back is on the fold. But if you wanted to treat this like a pleat, so we're going to put just a soft gathering here. If you wanted to treat this like a pleat, you down the center, all you need to do is mark where your yoke ends, put a mark where your yoke is done for, and then that becomes the pleat that you're going to sew into the yoke. So you would just stitch about 1/2 inch of the pleat down at the top. That fits in the yoke, and then now you've got that fullness opening up from the center back of the yoke. So here's where we're at with our back. We're going to have a yoke and some soft gathers in the body of the shirt, and we've extended the shirt beyond the waist. So this hole here, just imagine that's filled in with paper. Now we have to decide that about our front shoulder, or our front and back shoulder. So our back shoulder is a 1/2 of an inch bigger than our front shoulder. So the back shoulder is larger than the front. So we can do a couple things. We can ease this on like most sewing patterns would have you do. We can ease the back onto the front, or if you want, you can add to the front shoulder, which makes it stand further off of his body, or you can just dart out that extra at the back shoulder. So you're darting it out at the top, but that still leaves the fullness across the back of the shoulder blades where you want the fullness. So that's what I'm going to do for this one. I'm going to slice down one side, and all I'm doing is reducing the top of my back until the back shoulder fits the front shoulder. So now our yoke has a little bit of curve to it, which you can, oh, let me slide it up. Now the bottom of our yoke has a soft curve to it. You can keep the curve or you can re-straighten it out. I'm going to leave that little bit of curve because I think it's attractive to have the yoke dip just a little bit than it is to go straight across. So I'm going to take away some of that fullness from the back shoulder. The other thing you could do is say right before we had a 1/2 an inch extra, you could also just fold away a 1/4 of an inch and then say that you only have to ease a 1/4 of an inch onto the front. So maybe that's, let's do that. We'll split the difference. So we just took away some of the ease, but by only splitting this and not taking anything away at the bottom, we still have the extra room across his back shoulder blades, which is what we want. Another thing that a lot of shirts will have, there's a back yoke, right? Sometimes you'll see what they've done in the pattern is they've taped the shoulder together and brought the shoulder seam either forward. Sometimes you'll see a shoulder seam kind of in front of the shoulder, or sometimes you'll see a shoulder seam in a yoke that's behind the shoulder. So if you want to move the shoulder seam to the front or back for your style lines, all you do is tape the shoulder together and then cut a new shoulder seam. So that's another thing you can do. Then like if this were like a 40s ladies blouse or a woman's Western blouse, often the shoulder seam isn't at the shoulder anymore. They move it forward and then they split the front and open the front so the front of the shirt gathers a little bit onto the yoke too. Let's make the facing next before we deal with the collar. So to make the facing, we need anything that has neck edges on it, and we're going to retrace them right now. So we're going to face the shirt. Normally you don't line a shirt. So I'm going to just on my paper tape my back neck or my back shoulder onto my front. And then, so this type of facing doesn't have a seam at the shoulder, but if you think you're going to be taking the shoulder in or out, you can add a seam to the shoulder in the facing. So I'm going to cut this right up my center front. So I'm not cutting anything off of the original one, or I'm trying not to. And then I'm going to follow my neck. And then I'm going to go down my back neck. And with the yoke, actually, we'll look here too. You can have a facing that's just in the front. You can face just the front of it and have it go into the yoke, or you can make a yoke and stick a facing around the whole neck. Both are right. It just depends on what you want to sew. I usually think that still just making a facing go around the whole thing is a little bit easier, and then having the facing in the back, so it's more costumey than it is fashiony to have the yoke and a facing. But when you've got the facing in the back, it also gives you somewhere to like stitch your label or write his name or stitch the size or something. But you can do it either way. Is she getting into trouble? I wonder what it is.
It was black.
The dog ate something. Bring me a piece of it just so I can see. I wonder Is it beans or BBs? BBs. Oh, she ate a pattern weight. Good job, puppy. Okay, so all we've done so far is retrace our front and back neck onto a piece of paper. So I've got that edge. There's my center back, there's my shoulder, back neck, front neck. Then you just decide how wide you want your facing to be. I'm gonna make mine like 3.5 inches. Oh, I wonder what this was. What did she eat?
I don't know, little beads.
I don't know what this is. How funny is that? It's a dog mystery. Sorry, I've got to take a break. It looks like, who knows what this is? Like a liner for something? Yeah. I don't know what the dog ate, but she did a really good job. Okay, so I'm coming over from my front button lap, and I'm going to say that my facing is about 3.5 inches wide. So then I'm going to keep that 3.5 inches going around the back. And if you didn't want to face the back, you can just chop this off at the shoulder and say you're going to just face the front. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Then where you get this like little intersection there, I just like to take a ruler and blend that together. What on earth did she eat? It was black, it was curved, it had a zipper in it, and it had BBs?
Yeah.
Oh, puppies, don't get a puppy, anybody. They're a hot mess. Okay, so you can kind of see where this is going now. So really the facing, we've just recreated the front of our shirt. So, oh, except I didn't do the bottom of it. So this is something that will get interfaced. The facing will interface. And that will finish off our center front and our neck. It's the easiest way to finish off this collar, which is what we're going to work on next. So we don't need our yoke taped, our back yoke taped to the front anymore. Actually, we could leave it taped together to figure out the collar. I lied. So we've got our back yoke, our front, our back, and our facing. So now let's make the collar, and let's look. If you've got this book with you, we're going to go to a page that talks about a couple different collar things. One of them is if you want to make a collar with a stand. So Rosemary goes through the steps of making like a Mandarin collar. Maybe on our other shirt we'll make a Mandarin collar. So this one's going to get more like a Peter Pan simple collar. We'll make a stand collar for our other shirt. But she shows you how to make like a dress shirt collar also, where you can take the stand collar and then put a pointed collar over it. So you've got a stand or a Mandarin collar and then the collar that comes out over it. But what we're going to do is a Peter Pan style collar. So what does she call this? Flat collar with a roll, or a Peter Pan collar is what she calls this. And if you're looking along, it's page 146. So this Peter Pan collar, it's like really Peter Pan-y. It's got a curve in the front. We're going to make a point in the front because we're doing more of like a guy's look rather than like a soft lady's look. So what we start with is just on the body block or on our shirt front, tracing the shape of the collar we want. So we need to know where the shoulder is, where the center back is, and where the neckline is. So we're going to start with that. So I've got my front and back, right? I've got my whole neck here. So I'm going to take a pencil. Bring me one of the beads. I'm like so curious as to what the dog ate. What did the dog eat? This could be a prize. It could be a game. What is Taylor eating? Okay, so I want this collar to have a point, and then it's going to curve around to the back. Oh, that's like silica or something.
Yeah.
Like chunks of silica. Well, I hope she doesn't die. Actually, it feels like clay. What zippered mesh thing has clay beads in it that the dog ate? Okay, so I start by penciling on the shape of my collar. And to make the collar stand up in the back, we're going to be reducing the outside edge of the collar. So as we shrink the outside edge of the collar, that forces it to stand up and then lay back down. It forces a roll in the collar. Because if you think about the collar like as a circumference, right? If the outside edge of the collar matches a point on the shirt, that's where it will lie down to. So if we just cut this shape out like it is, it's just going to lay flat against the shirt and not stand up. But if we start to reduce or take in this outside edge, it makes it smaller. So then what happens is the collar has to fit higher up on the body of the shirt, and that's what makes it roll, okay? So this one's a little huge. I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller in the front before I commit to anything. So knowing that it's gonna creep up the body a little bit, even though I've drawn it here, it's gonna be a little bit higher up when we draft and sew it. And that's something that you'll have to make one or two and play with. So now that I've traced that, it seems like such a specific thing that she ate that we should recognize. We'll find out someday. Okay, so that thing, that kind of loose collar that I drew, I want to move it to I need some weights. I want to move that to a fresh piece of paper. So I've got a little bit of a curve in the front. It's going to my center front. We don't want it going into the button lap. We want it to just meet. I want to know for sure where the shoulder is. So as you're developing this kind of a collar, what is it?
She's ripped the bottom.
She ate the bottom of an armchair.
Like the little.
Oh, you know what? The zipper, yeah, the zipper is where the legs go in the chair for when you move. Oh my God, that's crazy. This dog is crazy. Don't get puppies. Okay, so I've retraced that shape, kind of, on my paper, but I'm only human, and I want to make the curves better. So before I cut this out, there's my shoulder. Here is my center back. And if I make a little bit of a right angle at the center back, it will just be better. So at the very center back, top and bottom, I'm making a little bit of a right angle. Then I'm going to make a nice curve there. I'm going to trace the curve of my neck a little bit better. Because with the tracing wheel, you don't do as amazing of a job as you think sometimes. I kind of got too much of a point there. Then I'm going to come and trace my outside edge. So right now, this is just going to lie flat and uninterestingly on the shirt. But we're going to fix that here in a minute. So we have our center front and our center back. That's important. And what we're going to do now is cut that out. Okay, so the collar we've got now just lays flat to the shirt. It's kind of boring. We want it to roll, and here's how we're going to make it roll. We're going to slice from the outside of the collar towards the neck, and we're going to reduce the outside of the collar, but we're not going to reduce the neck. And if we put more slashes at the back, so if we take away more at the back, as you take away more, the collar comes higher up on their neck. So if you take away more from the back and then just a little bit from the front, what will happen is the back will stand up higher on their neck, and then gradually the front will just lay flat back down on the shirt, which is kind of what we want. So, and when we sew this up, it'll be much clearer. Tomorrow will be the sewing up day. And I'll probably have Katura helping us sew while I'm cutting stuff out. So I'm going to take away about like a little more than 1/4 inch from a few spots in the back. And this like changing, so think about it like a circumference, even though it's not a complete circle. We're taking away from an edge, so it's going to push that edge up onto the shirt. And you can apply this in other parts of patterning. So now if we start to look at the two curves together, you'll see that the neck edge, that it doesn't follow, my neck edge doesn't follow the neck edge anymore of my original thing. But if I walk the edges together, the length is exactly the same. So we've changed the outside curve of the neck. Let me drag him over here. Just so they can, oops, did I run over something? It's so dry in here. Just show the neck. So what happens now is this can't just lay flat on there. When it gets sewn on the back of this collar, it's got to stand up. So I don't know, here, if I flip it this way, you can kind of see it. So when this is sewn on now, the back of the collar this is what we call the roll. The back of the collar has to stand up in order for the rest of the collar to touch the shirt. So we've actually added height. The collar comes up and then lays back over itself. So the more you take away this outside edge, the more we reduce the outside edge, the higher up the collar will roll. So you can just keep on reducing this outside edge until the top of the collar is, the neck edge is almost a straight line. Then it will stand up much, much, much higher. And if you think of like an evil queen collar, that's why it doesn't lay down, because the neck edge fits, and they've taken so much away from the outer edge of it that it can't even lay down. So if you keep taking this away and put like some zip ties or bones in it, then that's how you start to get an evil queen, or like Maleficent from the cartoons collar. Right? Fun with collars. So let's work on our sleeve a little bit, and then we'll start another shirt pattern. So all of this is going to get a 1/2 inch seam allowance added to it. We're going to cut 2 sets of the yoke on the fold. So our yoke back here, he's going to get cut twice because we're going to use one on the inside and one on the outside. We're going to cut our collar with the center back on the fold, and we're going to cut 2 of them, and we're going to interface just one of them. And then we're going to cut one of our back body on the fold. So that's kind of the basic pieces for what I'm calling our Bournonville shirt. And now let's work on our Bournonville sleeve. One thing we don't know, we don't have an arm's eye measurement. So I am going to measure the arm's eye from my body block. So I'm going to just I'm going to just lay all this together and measure my armhole. Now, if you wanted more poety, that big long armhole, this is the point where you're just going to cut the armhole down longer. So if you cut this down 1 inch in the front and back to make the armhole, taller or bigger, then you've got to remeasure your armhole to make sure that your sleeve still fits. But know that the more you cut this down, let me draw a little sleeve real quick. The more you cut that down, right? So let's say this is our regular sleeve cap here without a gusset. We'll put a gusset in our sleeve. So your armhole, right? If this is your front armhole and that's your shoulder, the more you cut down the armhole, the higher you have to raise the underarm of the sleeve. So it's kind of like building in a gusset. So whatever you take away from the armhole, the deeper you drop the armhole, the higher you have to raise the underarm of the sleeve. And eventually, if you go like full Pirates of Penzance, gigantic armhole, eventually your sleeve really doesn't even have a cap in it anymore, right? Eventually, the more you drop the armhole, the higher your sleeve cap is. And then that's where eventually you get into the more Russian style shirt that's just a rectangle with a neck hole and a sleeve that's a rectangle. And you can put in a little square gusset if you want. So that's kind of the development of that, is the lower the armhole, the higher the underarm of the sleeve is. Otherwise, they can't raise their arm. So it's like just adding gusset and gusset and gusset until you've got no shape at the top, which is totally fine. So the less shape you have in the sleeve, though, the more gathers you will have under the armpit when they put their arm down. So the curvier the arm cap, the cap of the sleeve, the curvier the armhole, the less gathers you get when they lower the arm. The less shape you've got, the more fullness you get under their armpit. It's just a thing. So let's start on our sleeve. Would you grab me a new piece of paper? Because the paper I had, I traced my body block back onto. But I'm going to measure the armhole while you grab me a new piece of paper. So we are going to measure the front armhole. So that's from my shoulder down to the armpit. That's 10 inches. And we're going to start with a pattern of a fitted sleeve and then make it puffy and make our cuff. So that's 10 inches. My back is like 9.5, so I'm going to say 10 also. So we're going to say that the armhole, the arm's eye, is 20 inches for when we start patterning our sleeve. So I don't want to cut any of this up. And I said his shoulder to wrist, I think, was 25. Yeah, we're going to say his armhole is 20. We're going to say his shoulder to wrist is 25. And we're saying his shoulder to elbow is a little bit less than half of 25. I'm going to have a sip of water real quick. Oh, that's yesterday's water. Yum. Huh? Dump that one out and just put fresh water in it. What's that alien movie where the little girl like leaves water all over the house with who did Passion of the Christ? Who's that director? Mel Gibson is a farmer and his daughter leaves glasses of water all over the house, and it's how they like defeat this alien race is by like splashing them with water. Real intelligent beings there.
Was it Signs?
Signs, that's it. Jared gets the point. Signs. Yeah, they're like in an Iowa farm. I'm finding the sleeve section. And this asks for underarm to wrist measurement. We're just going to fake some of this, but this sleeve, if you've got the book, starts on page 136. And I'm going to, again, just kind of blast through this because the majority of everybody here has done this with me. But if you haven't, get this book and work through it. Some of it seems like foreign language. You can always message me and ask. And I want to show you guys this other set of books. I'm coming right back. That's just great. If this stuff is new and has you a little bit frightened, get the set of Pattern Magic books now in English. I have a set, I think, in Japanese also. Tomoko Naka, is that Japanese? I have a set in Japanese at the house. I just look at the pictures. But what's great about this is they're starting with a body block also. They call it a bunka. And their body block is a little bit different shaped than ours. Most Western patterns have a bust dart that goes down towards the side at the bust, but a lot of Eastern patterns or blouses, the bust dart goes up into the armpit. You get the same shape when you're done. But what's cool is she shows you from using just a basic body block like we did for the men. She goes through all of this development to do all of these super, super, super cool things just using a body block like we're using right now. So they're working completely flat. So like, look how fun this one is. They've taped the whole body block together and cut a circle in the middle, and they've made a top that the front, back, and everything is just one piece of fabric, one cut around the whole thing. And then when you put it back together, it makes a top that fits perfectly as if it was loaded with darts. So this is a good set of books to have. There's Pattern Magic 1, there's Pattern Magic 2, which just gets like super crazy with like knots and boxes and swags and drapes and stuff. But what's great is at every point, they show you what's going on flat on the table. Because a lot of people swear that you can't do some of this stuff flat, that you have to drape it. But a lot of the stuff that people figure out draping wise can be figured out flat if you just, you know, think that kind of way. And she's also in the last few years put out a book for dealing with stretch fabrics, like weird things you can do with stretch. Like I wouldn't wear that top myself, but it's fun to see how to make that shape. So that's another good set of books. And the other set to get is the flat patterning. And oh, here's the tutu needle I was looking for the other day, is to get the flat patterning and the draping set from Helen Joseph Armstrong. I'll show you that one. So this is, I think this is the flat patterning one. This is flat patterning. She's a good author too. Anything by Helen Joseph Armstrong. It's loaded with numbers and stuff, but it's really great. Sometimes, you know, in your pattern making adventures, you like have an idea of what to do, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Sometimes if you just see the general shape in a book like this, then instantly you know what you're doing, or you knew why something didn't work. What's that? So this is really good too. Actually, here she's showing you raising the armpit of the sleeve to make a more relaxed fit sleeve. So this is just loaded with all kinds of stuff. And she has flat patterning books and she has draping books. So it's good to look at both of those. Then I've got this pattern making for menswear book. There's a bunch of different versions of this out there. There's actually a tailoring book that's better, that's got a green cover. I don't have it. Someone took mine or borrowed it and didn't give it back. And that's like stealing. This one, it goes through a lot of the same stuff. Like this shows how to make a sleeve with like a self cuff so that the cuff stays in place. It's got all kinds of stuff. But what's weird in here is like the math approach and the diagram is far different than all of these other books. So it's one of those things where you just kind of like read along and it doesn't make any sense. But if you just do it, it will work. And like, here's what's cool. There's crotches and pants come up all the time. This is showing, it kind of like lists some problems with the crotch, too tight, too loose, other things. Then in here, they're showing you what you need to do to solve the problem. So that's actually a good thing that this book has a lot of, is troubleshooting, where instead of it just showing you how to make something, they'll go through and show you an error, and then it shows you why you're getting the error. Like when you get weird wrinkles diagonally from your neck towards your armhole, this one, Pattern Making for Menswear by Bloomsbury, I don't know, it shows problems and how to solve problems. So sometimes you can learn a lot more that way. But let's make a sleeve. See, I always go off on a tangent. I said our shoulder to wrist is 25. I want to leave room at the bottom because we are going to we're going to make the sleeve a little bit longer. Because, right, if we just make it 25 inches, it's just going to fit right to the wrist like that. So we actually have to make the sleeve longer so that we get blousiness at the bottom. But we're going to start with 25 shoulder to wrist. There's 24. 25. And then, what did I say my shoulder to elbow is? I'm going to just go like halfway down, but make it, and then go up just a smidge. Like the distance usually from your elbow to your forearm is a little bit longer than your shoulder to your elbow. We said that our armhole is 20 inches. So to make a fitted sleeve, we take away 3 inches just because this book tells us to. So 20, 19, 18, 17. So we're going to make a box that's 17 inches wide by 25 inches up and down. And actually anymore when I draft a sleeve, I don't make a box. I just start with the shoulder to wrist measurement and then go from there. Like you don't need these outside lines. Whoops. And a lot of this patterning stuff, like you can always assume that one step is and divide it in half. So up here is going to be my shoulder. Down here is going to be my wrist. Here's where I'm saying my elbow is because I'm not like using any real person. And then the book tells you to measure from the wrist to the underarm to figure out the height, the cap of the sleeve. I just know that like on most guys, 5 inches works. So I'm going to just come down 5 inches. So that would be my underarm to wrist measurement, the line that I just made there. Then the next thing we're going to do is turn the top of this into a kite. So this is no gathers. We have no gathers. Yes, we have no gathers today. What's that commercial? Oh, yes, we have no bananas. Were they advertising bananas? What's that commercial about? Then it has you go in 1.5 inches on each side of this bottom line. And that goes up to the bicep. Then let's look at this the cap of the sleeve throws people pretty often. The first thing you do, let me see, this is like step 4, make a sleeve cap, right? We divide, so this is the shoulder, and then the bottom of the, or like the first part down in this kite looking thing, they call that the bicep line, even though to me it's really just the armpit, and like that the bicep is down here a little bit further. You divide each side of this into thirds. So I am just going to eyeball my thirds. The buttonhole spacer works really well for that. Or the other great trick, right? Like dividing things in thirds or placing buttons on a shirt is to just take a strip of paper and fold it. Oh my gosh, look how great I eyeballed that. That's pretty darn good. So see, right, like you can use this as a ruler rather than like figuring out the actual math. So then you take these lines all the way up to the cap. So this, if you're looking in the book, this is step 4 on page 136. And this is gussetless, but we're going to add a gusset to it. Then it goes, this is spot M, this is spot N, this is spot E, this is O, this is P. M goes 3/4 of an inch below that kite looking line. N goes 3/4 of an inch above that kite looking line. E is just E. O goes 1 inch above that line, and P is right on that line. So the higher O is, the more room you have at the back of the arm. So you don't want O to go above the shoulder, probably, but if you raise O up, you get more room at the back of the arm. So that's why, like when you fold a sleeve pattern for a woven thing together, the cap doesn't totally match because they're putting more room at the back of the arm. Because we move our arms like this, we don't so often move our arms like that. I mean, we do, but it's not, you know, you shouldn't be wearing a shirt swimming. Then it says to connect these with a curve, which is sometimes easier said than done. And it's like a curve that goes one way and then a curve that goes the other way. And this is making a fitted sleeve. So this would have just a smidge of ease and would fit right into our armhole without gathers and stuff. But we're going to want to have gathers and stuff. So there's our cap. Now let's review kind of how I do the gusset. So if you look in the book on page 137 at the top right illustration, it says sleeve balance points. That's important to know. The front balance point is where the curved line intersects the straight line. The back balance point is at P. So those are actually notches. They're going to go in your garment. And what these notches tell you, this throws people with some bottom patterns. Lots of times the sleeve will have a notch here, a notch at the shoulder, and a double notch there. But when you get to like the body of your pattern, there's no notches for the front and back. What that's telling you is from the armpit to that notch is sewn flat. From the double notch to the armpit is sewn flat. Then anything else over the cap is either eased or gathered. Sometimes they'll have a dot there and a dot there, and it lets you know to ease between the dot. But if your bottom pattern doesn't have that info, it's telling you that that's flat under the armpit and that this is flat under the armpit. Let me grab a flexible ruler here. Am I at the end of my rope? I got a little room. So we're going to make a gusset, but you need to know about balance points to make a gusset. I can't believe she ate the bottom of a chair. Where is she?
She's in the cage.
Oh, good. Okay, she's in prison. So I've got this this flexible ruler, which is tons of fun. And I know where my balance points are. So to put a gusset in, what I do is from this bicep line, from the straight line at the bottom of the cap of the sleeve, is I measure how high up it is to the highest balance point. So my front, from that line, from this line up to my front balance point is like 2 1/4 inches. I kind of make a line there. Then I measure up to my back balance point, and it's 1 3/4 of an inch. So I just give myself 2 lines there, so I know where my back balance point is, kind of where my front balance point is. Then I split the difference. Can you imagine that's what I was going to say? So I find the point between those 2 lines, and I make a line across it that goes outside my pattern. So to get room to raise the arm, because he's dancing, you need to come up almost all the way to the balance point. That's why we kind of split the difference between the front and back. And where some people get this wrong is they raise this up, they raise this line up and recurve it, and then they just come right down to here. Well, the problem is we need to keep the same distance from the balance point to the armpit, and if you go straight up, then your cap, the length of your cap is off for your fitted sleeve. Even though we're making this bigger, we want to get it right, because that's how we are. So what I'm going to do is put this flexible ruler, I'm going to put the 0 at the bottom of my armpit, and I'm going to just hold the ruler a little bit above the balance point, and then I push it up, and then I remark where 0 is. So my 0 is actually out there, and then the gusset just kind of dips down a little bit and then curves back to the sleeve. So see, if I'd gone straight up, my sleeve cap right here is an inch too small. So that's why you have to measure that line and kind of pivot it up. And then I just curve this gently, right? Bad freehanding, back to my underarm seam. So we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to put 0 at the armpit and curve that up to that line. So that line that's kind of the height of our balance points. And then I'm going to curve this. Actually, I could take a ruler and do it. I'm going to curve that back into my underarm seam like that. And then I flip the ruler over to get the other side of the curve like that. So now we've got a gusset. That's fun. Just re-listen, re-watch, read about gussets. Now let's deal with the bottom of the sleeve. We haven't made our cuff yet, right? So we have some stuff to talk about before we get to the cuff. First, we're going to mark where the placket would go. So like the little bias strip or the little rectangle or the like just cut it and zigzag over the edge, whatever you want to do. That gets centered. So this is the back of our sleeve. The placket or the opening gets centered at the back of the wrist, not at the underside of the wrist. When I'm watching a show somewhere and their sleeve opens down here, even if it's just a little button and no cuff, it drives me nuts. The sleeve should open back here. So you're going to find that section of your sleeve block and divide it in half. And we're going to go up about 3.5 inches. 3 inches is good for the opening. And that's in the book. It shows you right where to put that opening. Now, let's talk about, before we open this up and get fullness, let's talk about what makes the sleeve puffy at the bottom, or what makes the sleeve, you know, spill out over the cuff. Right now, this is 25 inches. And so our sleeve is just going to fit flat from the shoulder to here. No matter how wide we make the sleeve, nothing is going to come down and out. Let me draw a little arm here. So if this is your sleeve, if that's 25 inches and this is our shoulder, and so if my sleeve is 25 inches from there to there and my body is 25 inches from there to there, it doesn't matter how much you slash and spread the sleeve, your gathers will always be tight from the wrist to the shoulder. You will never get this going on unless the sleeve is longer than that part of the human. So that's what we're going to figure out right now. Did that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? Someone just say yes or no. That if your sleeve from shoulder to bottom is the same as the person, no matter how wide you make the sleeve, you will never get it to blouse away from the wrist. Oh, good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So let's look at that a little bit closer, because this is like an important thing on a shirt, is the sleeve. So right now we've got our 25 inches, but we're going to put a cuff on this. So let's say we're going to put a 3-inch cuff on it. What happens to this edge when we put a cuff on it? So when we put a cuff on it, it raises that edge up. It pushes that edge up, which will make some blousiness. And the way I kind of figure that out is I just take a tape measure, and I'm going to just put my tape measure from at my 25 inches, and I'm going to mark up 3 inches. So we're saying the cuff is 3 inches tall. That's going to push the sleeve up, which will make that blousiness. So I'm going to push my tape measure up 3 inches, and then I can kind of pull my tape measure down, and you can see how much blousiness you're going to get. So if I have a 4-inch tall cuff, I'm going to get that much blousiness. If I have a 5-inch tall cuff, pretty soon I'm going to have blousiness spilling out over the top of the cuff a lot. So that's one way to think about it, is that your cuff is pushing the sleeve up, which will make blousiness over the cuff. Now, if you've just got a skinny little band that the sleeve is going into, you've got to add to the bottom of the sleeve to start to get the blousiness. Same thing happens at the cap. If you want a Victorian sleeve that goes up and then down, you need to add height at the cap, and however much height you add, half of that is how much the sleeve will go up vertically. So if you want a sleeve to go up 8 inches and then fall down, you need to add 16 inches at the cap of your sleeve. That's like real extreme, but not for a Victorian lady. So we're going to put a 3-inch cuff on this, but just for fun, let's lengthen this about 1/2 inch to make sure we've got blousiness going on. So I'm going to go at the bottom of my sleeve, and I'm going to add 1/2 inch, and then we're going to gourmet it up a little bit more. So our cuff is really what's pushing our sleeve up. This 1/2 inch is just like a little bit of insurance. Then I want you guys, if you've got the book, to look at the diagram over here on page 140. What they're doing to like make this sleeve, this is like a sleeve for a nun habit or something here that they've got. But if you raise the front of the arm up a little bit and lower the back of the arm, you just get a more elegant sleeve. So when the guy is standing, there's a little bit of poof right here, but there's more poof at the back, which is always nice looking. So we're going to do that. So I know where my back of my sleeve is where my opening is. And then I'm going to figure out where the front of my sleeve is. So I'm going to raise the front up a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to drop the back about 1 inch. And then I'm going to curve that together. So just kind of look at page 140. And if you look at like a Vogue pattern for a blouse versus like a quick sew pattern for a blouse, you'll start to notice little differences kind of like this in the Vogue pattern because they're a little bit nicer. So you know, it's those little tiny things that you can do to quickly make a pattern that's just great even nicer. So we've got our length issue figured out, but what we don't have figured out is fullness going across the sleeve. So we're going to add that in next. And we'll make up we're going to cut out some of this tomorrow and have part of it sewn up and part of it not sewn up. And then we're going to draft a different shirt that's got a placket and a closure in the center front. So it's going to have a gap for the neck to go in. It's not going to button the whole way down. And then we'll do one with a Mandarin collar so you can see a different style of collar. And we're going to look at the trunk tomorrow too. So once we're done here, I'm going to send everybody a sheet of trunks that are a whole bunch of different sizes that work really good with shirts. If you've done our booty short class, that also works very, very, very well. I need some more water. Fresh water. It's so much better than yesterday's water. I used to drink well water when I was a kid. How did I survive? That was nasty. Or well, cistern. Well, I guess that's kind of a well. Okay. So now, always like referring to the patterning book and stuff is handy. You will see, hush, hush, darling, you've done so well. Taylor. Nobody's going to take my classes anymore because I just yell at the puppy. You could probably let her out. If you look at the slashing and spreading, like on page 141, we're letting the puppy out. Sorry about that, guys. You kind of get the idea of what's going on. So like this one shows just like a short little sleeve. If they slash it and open the bottom and lengthen the bottom, you get poof like that. So that's kind of like the poof we were talking about on the cuff. If you slash it and add to the cap, you get height in the sleeve cap and fullness. So if you add a little bit to both, you get height at the top. You get height at the top and fullness at the bottom. Taylor, what are you barking at? She just sits quiet until we have a class. Come here. Come apologize to everybody. Say, I'm a bad, bad dog. I'm so sorry, you guys, that I barked during class. She's crabby. She's getting so big, too. Hey, be quiet. So right now our sleeve just fits. It's just going to fit in the armhole with a little bit of ease and not a whole lot going on in the cuff. So we have to expand it. So what we're going to do is we're going to slit it up the middle. And then I usually slit it up to the balance point because we're probably not going to add fullness under the armpit. So we're not going to really mess too much with the balance points. So I've split it into 4. So I've split up to the balance points. I've split up to the shoulder. What is she barking at? Then I'm going to split each of those sections in half again. So now we can do all kinds of stuff. You can have a sleeve where the cap is fuller than the wrist. So see, if I angle it this way, I now have a cap fuller than the wrist. If I start to open them up and run them parallel, I've got an even tube. The cap fullness down to the wrist relates to each other. If I start to swing it the other way, I have a wrist that's fuller, or a cuff or a wrist that's fuller than the cap. So there's a Baryshnikov tunic. You guys probably know it. It's like green. It's like a green velvet tunic, and the sleeve is kind of fitted, and then it goes like that, and is huge at the cuff. The pattern for that is nearly like this. The cuff is just gigantically exploded, and then the cap has some gathers in it. So we're going to do a little more at the cuff than at the cap, but not a ton more. So I'm going to let my cuff angle just a smidge and my cap not quite as much. So this is one of those things too that, like, you just got to make up 1 or 2 so that you kind of start to get a feel for how much to open it. I know that if I barely open it, it's not going to look intentional. It's going to look like I had a sleeve from one pattern and maybe stuck it to this pattern. So I generally tend to make stuff a little more notice, like you want it to be noticeably opened up. Like you wouldn't put like a ½ an inch in each of these spots, or even an inch. But I am going to open the cuff up more than I'm opening up the shoulder. And then when this one's sewn up, we'll be able to see what the difference is. And actually, let's see how much I've added to the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In 5 places, I'm adding 2½ inches. That's 10, 11, 12. I've added about 12½ inches of gather into the cuff. And in the top, I've added like 5, 6, 7½ So I've added about 12½ extra at the bottom, 7½ at the top. So I'm going to just make a tape bridge across this. And then what you would do next is retrace this onto a nice piece of paper. And you're also going to remember that your shoulder seam, right? Whoops. Remember, we split this along the shoulder. You're going to remember that your shoulder is between that gap. We cut it up to the shoulder. And you're going to remember that back here, we cut along the split. We're going to remember that our split for the opening is between those 2 spots. And this is all pretty clear in that book and in other books too. But I do want to even this out. I've got more gap here than the other spots, so I'm going to undo him. And we're just going to make a tape bridge. If you go into a lot of big shops and they're crazy, you will see that underneath their tables are all these taped together messes. It's just because sometimes you got to cut something out before you make your pretty pattern. You just get to work. I was happy at Eric Winterling Studios to see all kinds of tape bridges under his table. And he's famous, so. Whoops, that wasn't a good tape bridge. Tape bridge, you're just sticking the sticky side to the sticky side so that it doesn't get stuck to absolutely everything. So now let's make our cuff. So we're going to make our cuff next. Let me get a freshy piece of paper. Cuff's pretty straightforward. The things you've got to know is what your wrist is. What did I say, 8½ or 9? We're going to do 8½. So I start by folding my piece of paper in half. Now, if you're doing like a gauntlet cuff, like a cuff that's like down to the wrist and then all the way up to there, you want to know that measurement, the middle of that, and the cuff so that you can make sure it all fits. But generally, for just a really basic cuff, if we know our bottom is 8.5, I start with a really soft curve. So I'm going to start actually with a little bit of a right angle. And I've got a fold here. So I just start with a soft, soft, soft curve. So not too curvy, but barely curved. And then half of 8.5 is 4.25. So I need 4.25. And then I need some over and underlap. So right now, if I finish my cuff and cut this out, I just have two ends that butt up. I don't have anything that surpasses itself. So I'm going to add another 3/8 of an inch or a 1/2 inch, whatever you want. So I'm adding 3/8 so that I've got some over and underlap. And we said we're going to make a 3-inch tall cuff. So from my bottom line, now I'm just coming up 3 inches. And then I'm going to make a nice right angle from the outside edge of my cuff. So that soft curve, just a barely curved curve, you will have it fitting at the wrist, and then above it's just a little bit bigger because the curve kind of like radiates out and enlarges up there. Let's cut that out. And then we should figure out actually where what needs to match from the cuff to the sleeve. So sometimes, so even though I put that 3/8 of an inch, that means we've got 3/8 going past each other. You know, we've got a center and then 3/8 tucked under and 3/8 tucked over. Lots of times I will get rid of one of the over or underlaps. So if this is my cuff, I'm going to say that that's my underlap for some snaps or bars or something, and that on the top side of my cuff, I don't want that excess piece. Does that make sense? So here on the top of my cuff, I'm going to get rid of the overlap, and we're just going to rely on the underlap. So my cuff, I'm going to cut that off, is just going to meet there. So I can put little hooks along here or buttons, and then or hooks and little bars, and it will just meet. Actually, if you were going to put buttons, then you need the overlap and the underlap, because you'd have a buttonhole and you need room for the button to be on either side of the line on the top and bottom. So that's just like, remember, if you're going to put like buttons with buttonholes, you need a little overlap and a little underlap. If it's just going to meet, if the under or the back seam of your cuff is just going to meet, you can get away with an underlap and no overlap. So that's what we're going to do for this one. We're going to say it's going to have little bitty hooks and bars, or little snaps even. But now we want to look at what should really be meeting what on our sleeve. And maybe I should tape in the bottom. I'm going to tape some paper. So that we're not looking at like nothingness on the bottom of the sleeve. I'm going to just cut a strip. I'm going to just I'm going to fill this in so that this like little cuff placement bit we're going to look at makes as much sense as it can. Is she back in the cage? No. Oh, she's at Dog Island, and she barks at everything she hears. I wonder what dogs she learned that from. Frickin' Basil and Everett. Poor guys, the other little doggies just have to stay at home because Taylor's the most train wrecky when she's by herself. But I think they're happy when she goes out the door in the morning with me and they get to have the house to themselves. I don't think they're complaining. Okay, so we're gonna look at like really where does the cuff go on here. Something else to think about too is, oh, I didn't get this quite done. I'm gonna untape this and make it lay flatter later, but this is just for show and telling. Another thing to think about when you're slashing and spreading this is you might slash the front somewhat and open it up, but you might open the back up even more. If you know the Kevin Kline Pirates of Penzance, that Kevin Kline's character, his front has some gathers in it into the cuff, but then the back of his sleeve, besides being more belled, has way more gathers. So you don't have to evenly spread this. You can spread more at the back than you do at the front. And that's why you need to know where stuff lines up with the cuff also. So back here, I've got my slit. So this is where the sleeve will open so that they can get their hand in there. Then I've got the center of my sleeve. Now, the center of my cuff, you have to think about this, that the center of the cuff doesn't necessarily match the center of the sleeve. So the opening of my cuff is at the back of my arm. My cuff is opened at the back of my wrist, which is here. So that means that opposite, so this is opposite the opening of the back, that actually matches halfway across the front half of my sleeve. So I just folded the front of my sleeve in half. So this, we're going to just say this is A. The front half of my sleeve matches the front of my cuff. The split in my sleeve matches the opening of the cuff. So then if you wanted to figure out more, the center of the sleeve is between the front and the opening, and then the back of my sleeve, the seam, right? The seam in the sleeve doesn't match a seam in the cuff because the seam in the sleeve is not where the opening is. So the seam in your sleeve matches the other quarter of your cuff. So that the cuff is going to match there and then flip around to here, and that will take up the other side of the sleeve. Did I lose anybody with how the cuff matches up to the sleeve? Because we can zoom in, but I think that made sense. Did that make sense? Just one person say, yeah, I get it. Because I've seen I've been in shops where I've been handed a sleeve where they make the middle of the cuff match the middle of the shoulder. Then you end up with like all these gathers on one side and less gathers on the other side. And then when the arm goes in it, the sleeve body twists around the arm, which is, it shouldn't, unless that's what you're going for. No? Okay, cool. So really, we've got our pattern for our very first shirt, and we're going to put a trunk on it. So right when we're done, I'm going to email everybody the trunk. But let's get started on our next shirt pattern. So we're going to do a Mandarin collar that has a shirt front with a placket in it, but no seam down the front of the shirt. Like lots of times you'll see a shirt where they just like stick their head in and have a couple little openings there. So let's just start that one. And I have got another body block traced out. And that's what we're going to work from. So we're just going to go about 10 more minutes. Actually, why don't I start with the collar? I'm going to start with the Mandarin collar right out of the book. That makes more sense right now. So this would be like good for a Russian shirt, good for a Chinese shirt, good for all kinds of stuff. Good for peasants. Peasants don't need buttons all the way down the front. They just need a couple buttons. So let me find the collar, and we're just going to do it together. This is on page 148, and it starts with draw a rectangle. So what did we say my neck was? 15 and a half, 16? I'm going to say 16. The next shirt, we're going to do a 16-inch neck. So we're going to adjust the neck on the next one to 16 inches. And we're kind of looking at figure 4/100, and we start with a rectangle that's half of our neck measurement, and it needs to be the height of the collar plus an inch. So we've got to decide how tall we want our Mandarin collar to be first. So I'm going to say a 2-inch tall collar looks pretty good on a dude. And so it says start with the height of the collar plus an inch. I'm at step 1, page 148, draw a rectangle. So our rectangle is going to be 8 inches. That is our half of our neck, and it's going to be 3 inches tall. Some of this stuff I do so often without the book that when I look at it in the book, I'm like, wait, what is this talking about? I start with a rectangle that's the height of the collar and then add the inch later, but it has you start with the inch, which is totally fine. So that's the height of our collar plus an inch, and then the length of the rectangle is half of our neck. Then the next thing we do is locate point E up from D. So what do we got? A, B, C, D. Locate E up from D, 1 inch. So we added an inch, we took away an inch. Then the next thing it says is locate F 3/4 of an inch to the left of B. So this is helping us kind of get the slant of a collar. And this, the same set of steps here works for men, women, and kids somehow. I don't know how it works, but it works really well. Then locate G up from C, the height of the collar. So we're doing a 2-inch collar. So we're going up from C 2 inches. Then connect G to F to create the top of the collar, and connect E to F to create the center front. So I need my curved ruler. So this is G. We're going to connect that up to that line that's 3/4 of an inch over. There's the top of our collar. Then we're connecting F to E. And one thing that I change a little bit, if you look at this itty bitty diagram here, really where F is, you kind of want that to be a right angle. It can be a little more than a right angle, but I kind of start by trying to force it to be a right angle. Otherwise, you end up with the center front of a collar that kind of dips a little bit weird. So I try to connect from that point, from F to E, I try to make a little bit of that a right angle so that my collar matches up really nice under my neck. And then at the bottom of E, I like to start with a little bit of a right angle too. Then the next thing, we connect, at some point we connect C to E. I totally missed that. Oh, it was the first step of step 3. So then we connect C to E. And really the curve that's at the top of your collar, you want that to be the curve that's at the bottom of your collar generally. Like you wouldn't do that curve and then this curve. You want them to relate to each other. So I just kind of am going to slide this down and make the bottom of my collar. So what we've got right now is a Mandarin collar. This is the center back. If you know how far your back neck is to the shoulder, ours is like 2 3/4 or almost 3 inches. I'll monkey with that more later. You can put in the shoulder mark, and then we've got a center front that just butts up and meets. We've got no overlap. So if you look at the stand-up collar development, it has you draft the following lines using figure 4101, no, 4101, 102, and 103. So this Mandarin collar is actually the stand of a proper man's shirt collar. So on a man's shirt collar, you'd probably only need like 3/4 of an inch of this. You wouldn't make it really 2 inches tall. We're going like kind of 60s, 70s right now if this were the under collar. But what's neat is if you just look at steps 101, 102, and 103 figures, what you end up with is you've got your Mandarin collar or your stand collar. Then it shows you where to add an over and under lap for a button, right? Because right now it butts up, so you'd have to add a button lap. Then you just continue on, and from that you draw the part of a collar that lays down on the neck like on a man's shirt. So look at those next steps at the bottom of page 148. But we're just concerned with making a Mandarin collar. And I don't even think they're calling it a Mandarin collar. They're just saying a stand-up collar. So we have a stand-up collar. That's what we have drafted. And we've drafted a stand-up collar that just butts up in the center and meets. But I want it to have a little bit of a curve so that you can see a little bit of his neck. We want to see his Adam's apple. So I've changed, instead of having a square front, we are going to have a little bit of an opening to the front. So voila, we have got a collar that will stay standing up around his neck. The other thing to know is, right, this was our center front over here. I whacked it off and made a little bit of a curve. But if you have something that's opening in the back, you just put the center front on the fold and then add whatever seam allowance or over and under lap to the center back. So this Mandarin collar can open in the front or the back. Just remember that. And I think we've got 5 minutes left, but I think we're at a good point to stop for today. So what I'm going to do in the morning is we're going to trace this shirt out. So we're going to interface our facing. We're going to interface one of each cuff layer. So we cut the cuff 4 times because we need inside and outside cuffs. We're going to interface just one side of the cuff. We're going to interface our facing, or that lasso thing we talked about, and we're going to cut 2 yokes, one body of the back on the fold and 2 fronts, and we're going to just do 1/2 inch seam allowance around the whole thing. And then I will have a trunk printed out so that we can show how the trunk goes on that. Then what we're going to do is this one with the Mandarin collar. I'm going to make just the front of a shirt and show you a quick way, an easy way to put a placket in the front, and then we'll just draft a different style of sleeve and back. So that's our plan for tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions? If not, we will say thank you and goodbye, and we will see you tomorrow.